Alright guys, welcome back to the X-1 build. So, I got a lot done in the last week, even though it doesn't look like it initially. I got all the flight controls hinged, I got the elevator and rudder set up, nice and smooth, lots of servo travel for so like, in other words, the gearing is excellent. So I get all the torque out of the servo. Nice and smooth. I really like these thin wing servos that Paul had this set up with originally. Again, I had moved all the servos from the original design. This was originally a foam core stab with two individual servos. I did a balsa stab, kind of changed that whole thing, put a single servo on it, and I changed the location of the rudder servo. But anyways, I got all that hinged. Everything's nice and tight, especially the elevator is really solid. I haven't hooked the servos up on the ailerons yet, but obviously they're hinged. And I spent a bunch of time getting these flaps set up. We'll flip the model over here in a minute and I'll show you guys how I did that. It's all internal, which is kind of cool. See, I got a little bit of body work we got to do there because of the flap. This is where the flap servo sits. And I put some epoxy around it to stiffen the mount up because it was kind of moving. But anyways, so I still have more body work to do. I've done quite a bit of it, but I still have to do the seams for the wings. I gotta kind of blend all that in real nice. I gotta kind of work out some stuff along this dorsal. I did get the little fairing on the top of the canopy made here, and again, this all has to be finished so then I can kind of body work all this stuff in so it's real nice and flush. Right now it's just kind of sitting on here, and I kind of have to build a hatch area first so I can attach this to it. I do have a Jet Hanger Hobbies Saber Pilot, which is pretty close to the right helmet style and mask and everything else and goggles and all that. This is a 1/6 scale, so it's a tiny bit big, but honestly it looks big in the model, but honestly X1 is really small. So looking at pictures and stuff, this is actually pretty close to scale, and he kind of sits underneath that fairing anyways. So it is a little big, but I'd rather have it a little big than a little too small. And again, this is the right mask and helmet combination. There won't be much left of them, honestly, because I'm going to have a floor in here. So really it's just going to be the very tops of the shoulders and then the helmet. And this helmet kind of is a little big, like for the width of the face. It's kind of a elongated helmet, but anyways, can't get too crazy with that. But it's going to sit right about here, and that sort of blocks the airflow, but this inlet is really oversized for the fan, and it kind of tapers down into a more constant size duct. And I did that because because I knew there was going to be a pilot in here, and I wanted it to kind of be able to grab air from around the pilot, and then it's a real long duct, so it'll kind of smooth out as it comes back and speed up as the duct gets smaller. So as it gets smaller, but this will be a flat plate in here, well, the curved sides and then flat base, so it'll kind of form like an inlet. And then Paul made me this new 3D printed canopy frame, and it was real kind of thick square frames. And what I did was I took my Dremel, turn this around here, took my Dremel, you can kind of see it, took the Dremel and I kind of airfoiled those on the bottom side and made them thinner, so that way in the front profile there won't be too much drag from those. So hopefully that'll work out real nice. And then, like I said, I'll flip it over here in a second. But I did get the nose gear all finished. I kind of made this strut out of a couple different pieces. This is a solid balsa door, and this is a Robart 2 1/4 inch tire. So I've been kind of racking my brain trying to figure out how to do this tow bar from the Jeep. And you know, on a real airplane, the tow bar is usually attached to the axle on the nose gear. I could potentially sort of do that here, but it it kind of complicates things, and this isn't a very heavy-duty nose gear, nor is it a very heavy-duty nose gear mount. There really isn't a lot of weight on the nose of this airplane, so it doesn't really need to be beefy, but I didn't want to have to redesign everything just to take the loads of being towed. So I came up with an idea. And I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut out a little square, bond in a piece of 1/4-inch plywood flush with the surface, and make sure it's all body worked real nice. Then I'm just going to have a small wood screw in there that sticks out. You know, the head will be, you know, sub flush, or it'll be sticking out about, you know, 1/8 of an inch or so. So there'll be a little gap between the head of the screw and the surface. And basically I'll just make like a little wire clip on the end of the tow bar that clips into that screw. So as you pull it, it'll be fine. It'll be like a RC car body clip, sorta. Think of it that way. So when the Jeep stops and backs up, it'll unclip it. The tow bar will fall down, and then the Jeep can pull away without anyone having to run out to the airplane, unhook it. At least that's the idea. So, and it kind of worked out nice. So this tire, as you can see, is really close to the to the wheel well, and in a normal direction, going forward, it pushes the strut back a little bit, and it's got enough clearance to spin and turn without rubbing. But as soon as you pull it to like go in like reverse, the tire and this is soft rubber, tire rubs up and grabs that edge. So basically it turns into a brake. So when a Jeep goes to push it backwards, this will turn into a brake. The plane will stop, it'll unclip, the thing will fall down, you can drive away the Jeep. So anyways, I thought that was pretty cool, and I think that'll work pretty well. So let me before I flip it over, I'm gonna show you guys the landing gear. So I spent a bunch of time, excuse the serious mess I got going on over here. So I spent a bunch of time on these doors. I made these inner doors from composite. So I made I put some foam blocks in here, and I taped over everything with some shiny tape, and then I did like a little layup. Just 2 layers, 1 layer glass, 1 layer carbon. And anyways, made a little door, body worked it, and then I'll show you in a second, but they're spring-loaded closed. And then I have a single servo right here to open up both doors. Now this one right here it's closed in the front because that's where the arm is, where it pulls it. So you need to make like a little brace inside the door to kind of like twist it so that way it stays closed. Anyways, let me get these gear out and I can show you how the doors work. And I don't have it all hooked into the radio yet or anything, but once I do. And then I had originally intended on having like a carbon tube through here that the door was glued to, and I was going to have an arm out here and actuate the door from inside here, which would have worked. But what I failed to realize was this is where the plywood mount is on the fuselage side, and it just wasn't possible to do it that way. But by the time I had figured that out, I was already super committed to all of this mechanism for these hinges. So I ended up just using the carbon tube as the hinge, which unfortunately has kind of left me with this kind of giant gap, which you won't notice in the ground because the doors are open, and you'll see here in a second. And honestly in the air you won't see it either because it'll all be orange, so it'll kind of blend in. But anyways, this ended up getting a servo to operate these doors ended up being way bigger of a chore than I originally thought, just because there's no room. So the wing is right here, so I can't really put a servo in here because the spar runs right across here, and I can't cut into the spar obviously. So there's just very minimal room, and all the room inside here to put a servo, there is none. So I was hoping to just like put like 2 servos right here and then actuate it out here, which obviously wasn't going to work. I could have put 2 servos, like maybe 2 right here, and then had the arm on the inside of the door area, but that I wouldn't have been able to access that really. So Anyways, it took me a while to figure this out, but I finally got it figured out. And see if I can just open it with my finger right here. So open up the doors. So it uses the full servo travel, and the way the arms ended up working out, basically it, mechanically takes a lot of load off the servo at that point because it's almost completely flat. So anyways, you can see the push rods. I got some little plywood arms that I put on there. So these are the 3D printed doors that Paul made originally. I did cut them down because they were kind of tall. So I cut them down a little shorter, and like I said, I need to put a little brace on this one to kind of twist it a little bit. But anyways, so yeah, these doors are spring-loaded. They fit nice and tight. Did a lot of body work around that area to get it all to look good. Oh, I got a big glob of Bondo right there. Didn't even realize it. But anyways, so when the gear comes down, it just pushes the doors open. So let me swing one of these gear out here. So it pushes the door open. See the carbon fiber there. But they're spring-loaded, so you take Dubro hinges and you take the pin out of them, and then you make a torsion bar out of some piano wire with the hinges, and it becomes a spring-loaded door. So and then I got a couple little plywood stoppers to stop the door from going too far in. And I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to put a little tab on the end of these doors. That way, when these doors close, it'll capture these and keep them from pulling out. They shouldn't pull out. There's a decent amount of tension on them, but at this closure, there's not a lot of tension. Right here there is, because the spring is really twisted at this point, but not on this one, but not when it's closed. So I might put a little tab on there just to keep them from opening up in flight. They shouldn't, but you never know. So anyways, let's swing this one out. So yeah, that's the whole gear setup. Everything worked out really well, geometry wise. It looks about right for scale. So yep, pretty stoked on that. Turned out pretty sweet. So obviously a lot of cleanup work to do. I still have to finish some of the body work around this. Like I had a little chunk of Bondo bust out right there, because when this thing slides in, it's all super tight. So anyways, let's get the plane turned over and I'll slide this in and I'll show you guys the flaps and stuff. Alright, so now you can see a little better shot of the elevator setup. It's a fiberglass arm. These are the half A Robart hinges, real small ones, but there's 4 of them in each elevator, so they're pretty solid and everything's pretty stiff back here. Not really worried about it. This thing won't be that fast. If it does 110, 115, I would be pretty stoked. So anyways, see you getting a lot of travel here, so that's real nice. And then again, I have a decent amount of body work still to do. The majority of it's done, but a lot of little stuff to do. So I've been trying to clean up all these gaps, like to make them real nice, kind of like this one, but they get chipped and stuff because you pretty much just Bondo them, sand it, and then kind of cut the Bondo and then pop everything out. So because everything's such a tight fit, it's making it difficult to make it super nice, and I want it to be super nice. So anyways, that's that, but it's looking pretty good. Like I said, I'm pretty close to being finished. It's just real small stuff, little small bits of body work here and there. And again, I got to do the wing seams. Got to get those tightened up real nice, and then I got to put the spar runs through here, and I got to find a little spot to put a plywood pad, submerged flush, or put it in flush with the skin, and then have a screw that goes into the tube to keep the wing from sliding in and out. That's how I'm going to run that. Okay, so let me show you how I did the flaps. They're all internal. Like I said, I just got to make some covers. Just got to make some little fiberglass covers. But basically, so this is how much flap I plan on using, which is a pretty good amount, but that's how the real ones had it. They used a lot of flap. The footage you see of the airplane taking off from the lake bed, it's got full flap in it. They're almost straight down. It's almost like a Spitfire, just a ton of flap. And I think they were using them as speed brakes, basically. That's what they were doing, because there is no speed brake on these airplanes. But what you can see here is these are free wing servos. They're Metal Gear digitals. But to take the load off of the servo, because, it's not a very big servo. I think these are 17 grams. This is a decent sized flap. Again, it's not real big, but I wanted to take the load off the servo. That way I can put it at full flap on landing approach on final. I won't use it for the whole approach. It'll be a final thing only. Like I'll turn base to final and select full flap. Just use it for the last 5-10 seconds worth of the final basically. But I don't know how fast this thing's gonna be landing. It might land kind of hot. So to keep the load off the servo, what I've done here is I have the arm so it's in line with the push rod. So basically what that does is it takes all the load off of the servo's motor and keeps it from burning out the servo. So, and also, you know, it keeps it nice and tight. They're basically slop free. But I plan on, you know, probably about 10-15 degrees, and even that's pretty tight in that position right there. But I basically have full servo travel for my flap travel. That means that I'm getting the maximum amount of torque from the servos I possibly can. And again, as you can see, it's on the innermost hole. The whole arm is basically gone except for that last little stub. So that's how my flap servo is set up. These are thin wing servos like what's on the elevator and rudder. And so those just bolt in. I gotta just make a little cover and then gotta make a push rod, no big deal. So that's the flaps. It turned out pretty sweet. Super happy with that because like I said, the real one used a ton of down flap. So the door on the nose, I had originally planned, in fact, I cut the wire, but I had a torsion bar on this one as well to be closed, to be spring-loaded closed, which in theory works. The problem is this little baby nose gear wasn't strong enough to open the door with the tire. And so the whole idea was that the door would open and then it would rest on the strut, you know, and then as it closed, the door would, or as the gear went up, the door would close behind the gear, and then the tire pushes the door open, but it would get about halfway up and then just stop. And you know, this is soft balsa, so maybe it was just grabbing because it's balsa, and maybe it could have done like something real smooth and hard, like a piece of fiberglass or something that could have made it slide easier across that. But it just seemed like it wasn't going to work. So I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to use a small piece of bungee from the strut to the door. When the gear goes in, the bungee will close, or will pull the door closed. And then as the gear come out, it just kind of kicks the door open. And again, it just rubs up against the strut, which is fine. And you know, I won't need a lot of servo throw on this steering because I probably only need about that much. Just a little, like maybe 10 degrees each way. Just because it is super narrow and super short coupled, so it's going to want to tip over, and too much throw will make it want to tip over even easier. So, but that being said, I have put a battery in this thing and sat it on the ground where the CG's at. And honestly, it's not as top heavy feeling and easy to tip over as you would think. I think because the weight is all pretty low in the plane. And even though these are narrow, they're sitting on the bottom of the airplane. So it's not like it's sitting real high off the ground. So, you know, the distance of the center of the wheel to where the weight is at is pretty much all on center line. It's only about 4.5 inches. So the weight's not up very high. And so it actually, I think it's going to handle better on the ground than you would think this little narrow landing gear would be. But anyways, in the last video, I don't remember if I showed you guys or not, but basically, maybe I did. But I added in no, I don't think I did. So I posted a couple of pictures of it, but what I ended up doing, because when he would sit this on the ground, the gear would just, it has struts, as you can see. The gear would just collapse all the way. The springs weren't strong enough. Now the real X-1, you know, when the gear are down with no load, they're like this. They have a ton of positive camber, so they kind of bow in like that. And then when it sits on the ground, they sit like this. But the gear are completely collapsed on the ground with the weight of the plane. So what I did was I took the strut apart, and I used because these things are super short. So I just took like a 1/4 inch length worth of pretty stiff spring, and I put it inside of the main spring, which is a pretty big diameter spring. So it's like a secondary, it has like a two-stage spring. So this first stage is real soft. That's the original spring. So basically, this is just to make it look right when the gear hanging out, basically. And it gets to this point, which is about half the strut travel, and then it's got a real stiff spring in there. And so when it sits on the ground, and I'll show you guys here in a minute, it sits down about right there, and it just has some suspension travel left, which is nice. It's not just going to be, you know, bottomed out the whole time. So it should be able to absorb some bumps, and it sits real nice. So the other reason why I did this was that it was super low to the ground with the gear fully collapsed. And I plan on flying this off of the lake bed for posterity's sake, obviously. And, you know, with rocks and stuff, I just felt like the bottom of this thing was going to get really beat up. And not only that, but when in the flare, when you come into land, or even on takeoff potentially, it sat so low, I was worried it was just going to scrape the crap out of this bump back here. So let me get this thing flipped over and put on the ground, and I'll show you guys how it looks sitting on the ground. Caution, it's pretty sweet. So anyways, this thing just looks, it just looks the part on the ground. The stance of the landing gear is absolutely perfect. Paul knocked out of the park with the landing gear design on this, and it's just super cool. And again, you guys can see what I was talking about earlier. When the plane's traveling in normal motion, tire spin's totally fine because there is some slop in the strut. But as soon as you go to back it up, it locks into place and becomes a brake. And so when that little clip, when the Jeep pushes it back, the plane should stop, and that clip should have no problems getting undone, falling away, and then Jeep pulls away with the tow bar on it. So anyways, that's the plan. We'll see how it works. But yeah, I'm so stoked on this model, guys. It's just hard to describe. I mean, this is probably the world's first Bell X-1 with scale landing gear that's going to take off from the ground under its own power. So no, it's not rocket powered, but it's probably the first Bell X-1 model that's fan powered as well, at least in a scale form. So, and as far as I can tell, you know, Paul used 3 views to design this. We really didn't cheat on this design. So wings are scale, tails are scale. Everything is proportioned properly. So it doesn't have like, the wings aren't bigger than scale or whatever. But, you know, I was a little worried about the airplane being heavy, and it is going to be heavy. It's going to be 9 pounds at least. It's going to be a solid 9. If I use a little bit smaller pack, like a 6000, it might weigh less than 9 pounds. But it's going to be right there at 9. Sounds like a lot, but really this model is not that small. It's every bit as big as my jet hanger Sabre, although it doesn't have as much wing. But it is a straight wing, and if there's one thing I know is that straight wing jets fly extremely well. So, like we had the free wing T-33, you know, with that straight wing on it, just beautiful flying jet. Panther that I had, just a beautiful flying jet. So this is a nice, even though it's thin, it's a decent sized wing. It's not real small and it's not big. And I think even at 9 pounds, it's going to be a nice flyer. And we got a little bit of washout in these wings, so it is going to have kind of a nasty stall, but I think it's going to be better than I'm expecting it to be. So that's the plan. And I'm really hoping it's fairly fast. It won't have a ton of vertical. What vertical it does have will all be based on momentum. But it's a pretty clean airframe, thin tails and everything, thin wings, and obviously cleaned up with no open gear wells or anything. You know, the inlet's a little draggy maybe, but I think this thing's going to go pretty good, even for being 9 pounds. So anyways, I'm talking too much now. Let me get this thing on the ground and show you guys how it looks. Alright, so I got the Spectrum 7000 sitting in about where it needs to be for proper CG. And one thing that's nice is it's got a pretty light nose. Again, like I said, there's not a lot of weight in the nose, so it should rotate really nice. But it does have a little bit of positive angle of attack as it sits in the ground, which it should lift off when it's ready. Like, I won't have to flare it and take off. It should just rise off sitting at this angle when it's ready to go. Obviously when it's properly trimmed and everything else, and the CG is good. So anyways, this is the first time I've had it out on its wheels, basically, And my theory with the backwards brake definitely is for real. So you can see that wheel does not spin when you push it back. No problems going forward. So when the Jeep goes to push it back, it's gonna not want to move. That thing's gonna unclip. And that idea is gonna work amazing. So anyways, that's how it looks. Look at that. That stance is just perfect on the ground. Super, super cool. Now the nose gear door is longer than scale because the real nose door, or the real nose gear, just kind of telescopes up into the fuselage, so the door is super short. So that's one issue I'm gonna have, is I have very little ground clearance between the door and the ground. So on asphalt, not gonna be a big deal at all. On the lake bed, where there's rocks and stuff, it might get pretty beat up and even potentially busted off. So that kind of sucks. But just look at this thing, guys. It is perfect. It is really freaking cool. So anyways, look at that long tail moment too. This thing, I think this thing is gonna fly pretty freaking sweet. It's got a long tail moment, big tails, so it should be nice and stable. Like I said, that wing is small, but it's not that small. I am a little concerned about the CG with the fuselage. So it's a big fat body, obviously, and I am concerned that's going to affect the CG as far as like where my calculations are. So I'm gonna err on the side of nose heavy, just because I don't know what it's going to be like with this big fat body. So if it were just a wing, I know exactly where to put it, but it's not. I got to take into account this giant fuselage. So anyways, that's a long enough video for you guys. This will definitely be the last video until the final reveal. That thing looks super cool, man. But yeah, the next time you guys see this thing, it'll be finished. And honestly, I'm pretty close. I think by the end of this next week, it'll be pretty much done. I'll be waiting on decals at that point, so pretty stoked on it. Just looks perfect. Everything about this model looks right. So anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this X-1 update. Probably bored you guys to death. Super long video, but anyways, that's where we're at. Can't wait to see this thing in the air. It's gonna be a trip. Anyways, we'll see you guys in the next one.